Coming from the farthest reaches of the universe to challenge the worst toy repairs on Earth is the most powerful hero ever, toy-polloi.
Hello and welcome to another video from toy-polloi, and in today's video we are taking a second look at this vintage Thundercats Lion-o figure, and we're going to be doing some more repairs on it. In the first video I took one of these guys apart and got him all working again, fixing a broken leg and getting the lighting in his eyes working. Today we are mainly going to be concentrating on sorting out the paint, which seems to always be damaged on these figures. They have particularly bright blue boots and very light coloured hands, and the paint on those seems to chip particularly easily. I also have one very badly damaged Lion-o, which you can see at the back here, who is missing most of the paint on his face, so that's going to be the bulk of the project today, but I'll also be showing you a few other little repairs along the way. Now if you really like this figure and want to see more about it, then you should head on over to my Patreon or my YouTube channel membership page, because I've just done an extra video on there showing how to change one of the bulbs inside the head of this figure to get the lights working, and also fixing up one of these power rings. To become a Patreon, follow the link in the description, and if you want to become a YouTube channel member, then hit the join button below this video. But enough about that, now let's get on with the main part of this project. So here we have a selection of Lion-o figures, and they all suffer with the very common problem of paint rubs and paint wear. That's because these figures are generally very well played with and enjoyed by kids. But you can see here on this Lion-o we have paint rubs on his boots, we've got paint rubs on his hand, and we've also got paint rubs on his hair. There's a few little marks on his body as well, which we will touch up along the way, but the main issues are the gloves, the boots and the hair. And you can see on this one there are sort of a few variations of Lion-o. This guy has an orange cast head, so it's made out of an orange plastic, and the hair is painted on red. But I have this one over here which is the other way round, so the head is actually made out of a red plastic, so his hair is all fine, but as you can see most of his face has worn away, so we will deal with that as well. We also have these Sword of Omens that needs sorting out. This one here, as you can see, is very bent, so we'll have to straighten that, and then a lot of the silver paint has worn away, so we will get that all fixed up. And along the way I will also show you a few other little repairs and tricks for getting this figure fixed up. Let's start with Lion-o's gloves or hands. This appears to be a sort of beige with a little bit of yellow in it, although I have to say all the figures I've got are slightly different colours. So this is very common with old figures. You can see here this one is a bit more yellow than that one, this one is a little bit more beige than that one. There is never going to be an exact paint match, which is why we have to mix every single time, and I will mix 3 different colours to paint up the 3 different hands on these figures. But I've got a sort of basic set of colours here. I have some white because we're obviously going to have to add white to whatever I mix. I have this which is called beige, and these are all Vallejo model colours, so this is 70.917 beige. I think that is going to be fairly close, but it's not going to be exact. So I also have some yellow, which again is a Vallejo model colour. This is 70.953 flat yellow, and I think mixing a combination of those colours I should be able to get pretty close to this one. This here may need a different shade of yellow because it looks possibly more sun damaged. In fact, I'm definitely going to say sun damaged. It's one colour on this side and a different colour on that side, so that one's going to be particularly awkward, but I reckon we can get a pretty good match with that. But it's also worth noting that the colour that we're going to use on this hand is going to be the same for the sort of lighter patches on his face, so his chin and around his eyes also use the same sort of beigey colour paint. So let's get mixing, and I'll sort of let you know what the combination is to get the right shade, but I'm reckoning that we can get it from these 3 paints. So let's get mixing. Okay, so it turns out it's actually pretty straightforward. It is just this beige colour with a very tiny amount of yellow added, and I've got a colour that is pretty close. So this hand, you can see, has quite a lot of damage to it. The paints I'm using here are matte in finish, so once everything is painted we will be putting a clear top coat on it, which will give it some protection as well, because this hand gets a fair amount of wear on it when you're pushing the sword into it. But you can see that is going to be a pretty close match. There's a lot of little repairs to do on this one. I may end up painting more than half of the hand with this colour just to get it to match, but yeah, I think we can go ahead and use that paint. It might be I need to add a little bit more white to that, and certainly when I come to the other ones I will be adding more yellow, but that is certainly a very good base. So let's get these hands painted. So as you can see, that has worked really well. It's actually taken a couple of coats to get it to this colour, because we're painting a light colour onto a fairly bright orange, so a couple of coats is what's needed. But yeah, that is looking really good. I'm very happy with the colour match that I've managed to get there. And while I'm waiting for that to dry, I'm just going to do a little bit of repair work on this Thundercats logo on the belt. It's mainly black has worn away, so I've just got a bit of black there. I'm going to touch those up. I can see there's also a little bit of red on these dots, but it doesn't look like that's particularly worn, so we'll deal with that when we do the hair, because it looks like it's actually fairly similar in colour to that. So I'll just touch up that black, we'll let everything dry, then we'll move on to the boots. The blue of the boots is also proving quite tricky, because they are very different across all of the figures I've got. This blue is a bit more sort of muted, this one is quite vibrant and got a bit more of a sheen to it. So I'm sort of still mixing colours to get something as close as I can, and I think I've got something that I'm happy with. I've mixed two different shades of blue. So again, Vallejo model colours, this is flat blue 70.962, and I've mixed in a bit of this one, which is just called blue, which is 70.925. This is a much darker blue than that one, so a combination of those two seems to work pretty well for this one. This one still needs a little bit more sort of lightening, so maybe just a bit of white into that. I haven't quite got that one sort of finalised yet, but those two blues are a good base for Lion-o's boots. So let's get those repaired. I think the same blue is also used on his belt, so there's a few little minor touches up on that that I will do at the same time. In the first part of this project, I showed you a Lion-o figure that had been broken apart, which had a damaged leg where the peg had broken off. And to fix that, we just glued it back on and used a screw to reinforce the little post. There are other issues with these Lion-o figures. The same problem actually happens to the left arm. So the left arm will break off, and you can just do exactly the same repair. So glue it and then put a screw in. But if the right arm breaks, that is a little bit more of an issue. And on this figure here, that is exactly what happened. This is the battle-matic arm, and it had snapped off, and basically what had happened is this little post here had snapped off and was loose. So what I've done is I've just glued that back on, but just gluing that back on is not going to be strong enough. We needed to add some extra support to it. So what I did was, into the sort of main mechanism part here, I've drilled a 3mm hole and I've inserted a very tiny piece of Lego. So this is a piece of a Lego antenna or aerial. This is a 3mm diameter post. So I've inserted that into the little mechanism post here. I've then also drilled a 3mm hole inside here, which you can just about see. So when you now put these two pieces together, we have an extra bit of support. So it's not just being supported on this piece here that had to be glued back on, and that was just glued on with super glue. It's now got the extra bit of support support of Lego, and because this is a fairly rubbery plastic, you end up with a really tight fit. You don't actually need to glue this, although you could glue it if you wanted to. All we've got to do is to push that in there, and then we get that extra bit of support. So the glue that's holding the orange bit on does do a bit of work, but most of the work is being done by the piece of Lego that goes into the arm. And then we can just pop that onto the figure, put him back together, and the battle-matic version all works again. It's a really sort of straightforward fix. The tricky part with these figures is actually splitting them apart. You just have to put a knife in somewhere down here and start twisting, and it will crack apart. You always get a little bit of damage, but it's generally fairly sort of easy to hide because it's on the side. But you can see now that that arm is back in place, it all works again, and all I've got to do is glue this figure together. So it's fairly straightforward to repair the limbs on this. As I say, the hardest part is splitting them apart. Now, red is one of those colours that I don't actually have much choice in my collection of paints. I've only got this game colour, which is 72.010, and this is called Bloody Red. So that's going to be the base for whatever colour I mix. And I've added to that Vallejo model colour. This is 70.812, and this is Violet Red. I mean, it's just a tiny drop of that added to this red, and I've got a colour that is really a pretty close match, certainly to this figure. The other figure looks a little bit darker, so I might have to add a little bit more of the violet, but this colour really is going on very nicely. You can see here we've got some sort of scuff marks on the top, and if I paint this colour on, it blends in almost immediately. So this is the base that I'm going to use to touch up all of the red on this figure, and that's, as I say, a slight modification when it comes to the other figure, just to get the tone about right. But I'm very happy with how this is covering, and again, it may take a couple of coats because we're painting red onto a bright orange underneath, but you can see that is matching pretty nicely. So let's get all of Lion-o's hair painted up. With this Sword of Omens, before we even get to painting it, we need to straighten it. So what I've got here is some just boiled water. I'm going to put the sword into the water. It'll heat up the plastic, and we should be able to reshape this and make this a much straighter sword. Then we'll dry it off and we'll give it a coat of paint. So let's get this sword straightened up. And there we go, simple as that. The sword is now straight again. Toy-polloi. Now that the sword is straight, we can deal with the paint scuffing on this, and I'm going to be using a silver Sharpie. I've used this before on other toys and it's worked really well. I'm not 100% convinced it will work on this just because the red is so dark, but it's certainly worth giving a try. So let's see if this works. If it doesn't, I'll move on to something else, but this is always a good starting point. Silver Sharpies are pretty easy to get anywhere, and they generally do a good job on this sort of silver. So let's give that a go. Oh, it's not working too bad on that, and the little sort of scuff marks on the Thundercats logo. Yeah, that doesn't look too bad. Let's try it on some of these. It's certainly covering. It might need a couple of coats, and it's a slightly different shade of silver, which is not necessarily a problem because I can always do the whole thing. Yeah, not 100% convinced on that. It's okay on the sort of little logo there, but you can see it's not covering particularly well on the sword. So I'm going to go and have a rummage and see what other silver paints I've got, see if I can find something close that we can have another go with. Okay, I think I have something, and it may be a combination of this with the silver Sharpie on top of it. What I've done is I've mixed up some of this game colour, which is called silver, which is 72.052. I've added a very small amount of black to that, and that gives quite a nice silver, but it's just a bit watery. So I then added some of the white colour to it, and that's made it a little bit thicker, and it's now actually covering the red reasonably well. The match is not particularly perfect. It's a little bit less silvery than the original stuff, but it's certainly covering. So I think my plan is to cover all of these little scratches with this colour, and then I'm going to go over the top of it with the silver Sharpie to add some of the sort of silveryness back. But this is actually covering pretty well. You can see that the red only takes one coat and it's disappeared. So yeah, it's going to be a combination of paints to get this working, but I think this will be it. For a final challenge, before I put the top coats on everything, I thought I'd see if I could salvage this face. Now this is the worst Lion-o that I have. As you can see, this has red plastic under the skin tone. On all of the other figures the plastic is orange and they've painted the hair on. This one has unpainted hair, so it's just the red plastic. But as you can see, all of the paint has come off, so I'm going to try my best to see if I can salvage this. I've already mixed up an orange which is about the same colour as Lion-o skin, and for that I've used this game colour called Orange Fire, which is 72.008. I've mixed into that some of this gold yellow, which is 72.007, and then a tiny amount of white, and I think I've got a colour that is a close match. It's going to take a few coats because covering this very dark red with the orange is going to be pretty tricky. I'm not going to worry about the rest of this figure. As you can see, it's in a pretty sorry state. I just want to challenge myself to see if I can actually get this face repaired. So let's give this a go, see what happens. It's a very useful thing to do if you do paint touch-ups and repairs on vintage figures like this, to keep a note of which paint colours you've used. That way, if you have to repair a figure in future, you can just refer to your notes and you'll know exactly which paints that you have mixed to make the right colour match. And that's what I'm doing here. It's something I should do more often. As you can see, my notebook isn't particularly full, but I have now added Lion-o to this list. But if I have to repair a Lion-o in future now, I can just refer to my notes and I see which colours I've mixed to make the various colours on his body. Right, I think I'm pretty much done now with all of the paint on these. They are all looking really nice. Even the one that had all of the paint removed from the face is actually looking pretty reasonable, but we need to put a top coat onto all of the areas that we have painted, and there's a couple of ways to do this. I could use this Vallejo colour, which is a satin varnish, which is 70.522. This is what I normally use when I'm painting action figures. It gives a really nice finish that's not too shiny. It looks a lot like the original paint, but there's a whole load of areas to paint on these figures. So actually what I'm going to use today is the Mr. Hobby top coat, and this is a semi-gloss spray, and that gives a very nice finish, and it's also very hard wearing, but it's a little bit less precise because essentially you've got to spray it over most of the figure, even though I will try and get it onto just the areas that I've painted. But yeah, that is what I'm going to be using today. It will give a very strong finish. This gives a nice finish, but it's possibly not quite as hard wearing. I am also going to spray the sword as well, which I did in the end put the silver Sharpie on. As you can see, that's a really nice sort of colour match now. Very happy with how that's turned out. So let's get these all sprayed and then we'll look at the final figures. And here we go, here are the finished figures. The two on the right are the ones that I've been doing all of the paint touch-ups on. The one on the left is all original, apart from the Sword of Omens, which is the sword that we sorted out. And as you can see, they are now really very displayable figures. With figures like this, when you get paint rubs on them, because the plastic underneath is such a bright, vibrant colour, especially on things like his boots, the paint rubs really show through. And just by touching them up, you take what looks like a very scruffy figure and make it into something that is really quite displayable. Now, neither of the figures I've worked on today I would class as mint, but they are very displayable again. And that was the whole point of this process. I wanted to learn what paint colours were needed and get some figures that I could put back on display. And most of my collection doesn't consist of mint figures. That's not something that I'm after. I like figures that have a little bit of play wear on them, so there are still some rubs and marks all over these figures, but the overall look of them is so much better than when they started. The extreme paint rubs you get on the hands and feet of these really make them look tatty, and just this little bit of tidying up has made them look very nice again. And as you can see, also the little touch-ups that we've done on the hair really do make quite a big difference, again because you have that orange plastic showing through on the red. It's very, very noticeable. The Sword of Omens actually ended up looking really nice as well, because when you saw it at the start, we all bent and broken. It didn't look like much at all, and it didn't cost me very much when I picked it up on eBay because it looked in such a sorry state. But just by re-straightening it and putting a little bit of silver paint on, we've now ended up with a really nice sword that looks absolutely fantastic when displayed with the figures. The figure that had no paint on its face has actually turned out better than I'd expected. There was no real sort of end goal with this one. I just wanted to practice painting and seeing how close to the original paint I could get and all of the details that were on it originally. And the end results have actually ended up far better than I'd expected. It's by no means perfect, but compared to how it started, it really does look pretty displayable. The rest of the figure is still in a horrible state. As you can see, there's lots of damage to the plastic, but the face, yeah, I'm very happy with how that turned out. And it just means that I've had another little bit of practice at painting fine details onto an action figure. So there we go, that is it for this project. Those figures are now ready to go with the rest of my Thundercats collection. And if you've enjoyed this video, then why not check out my recent Thunder Tank project, where I restored a Thunder Tank and also made some custom stickers for it. That was a really fun thing to work on, and I'm very pleased with the results on that. And if you really have enjoyed this video, then make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the bell to be notified each time I upload a new video. And if you'd like to help out and support the channel, then why not think about becoming a Patreon or YouTube channel member. You get early access to all of my restoration videos and also access to an exclusive video series called On the Cutting Mat, where I show projects and restorations that you won't see anywhere else. So have a think about that, and thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching Toy-Polloi. Subscribe for more great videos.